I was reading earlier today with great fascination. I didn't know I would become so interested in maize, the different kinds of maize, and where the maize is grown and where it is exported to and imported from. But South Africa's maize output is not looking good. Wandile Sihlobo is an agricultural economist who I absolutely love talking to. Wandile, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, John. You should always be interested in anything related to food, John.
I should indeed, and not, Wandile, in the way that I'm interested mostly, which is consuming too much of the wrong things.
And I think, John, on this one that you are touching in it today, just to frame it for South Africans, it's an important one because we're generally a country that I would say on stable grains, we are a net exporter, particularly on maize. But the season that we just finished this year was very tough. We had that midsummer drought, February to March, that led to our harvest declining by 23%. So stocks are a bit tight. And our neighboring countries, the likes of Zambia, Botswana, and the others, faced an even much tougher problems, and they are buying a lot more even from us. And I think it's what has led to that story that caught your attention earlier.
So I sort of vaguely know that there's a difference between white and yellow maize. How important is that distinction in South Africa in terms of which one we need more of, which one is more important, which one is... in which of the two will price rises most impact poor people who use that, and so on?
So broadly, we produce almost equal proportion of white and yellow maize. White maize is purely for human consumption, while yellow maize, we use it in our livestock industry, feeding cattle, feeding poultry. And of course, there are some of the food products that do use a little bit of a yellow maize. But white maize is also a staple for the entire Southern Africa. And indeed, outside of here, it's Mexico. But John, it even gets interesting because when you think about the world, South Africa is the world leading exporter in white maize, followed by Mexico. So that's how important white maize is. Globally, though, when you look at the maize that is traded, a majority of it, 95% or more of the globally traded maize, is yellow maize. So when people say there's a lot of maize in the world market, they're usually referring to yellow. But on white, which we need for human consumption, really few countries where you can get that in good quality and volume that you need.
You say white we use for human consumption. Is that sort of tradition, history, or is there a significant nutritional difference between white and yellow maize?
It's interesting because if you were to bring on the call someone who is on the nutrition space, they may even make a case and say yellow maize perhaps has a little bit more nutritious value than you get on white maize. But because of the diets and the tradition and the taste that we've been used to, we really have been accustomed to white maize. And the senior South Africans will tell you a story that back in the 90s, there were times where we were hit by the drought and there was no white maize in the world, and they blended yellow and white back in those days. And they found that people did not really appreciate that a lot. So it's really an issue of a consumer preference fundamentally rather than the nutrition.
Because it seems, if I was reading the stories that I've been reading correctly, that the shortage of white maize is worse than the shortage of yellow maize. But given what you've just told me, that doesn't matter. People don't want yellow maize by itself or in combination with white maize. So we've got to find white maize somewhere, but our neighbours need it even more than we need it. They have greater shortfalls in their production. So, we export some to them, which is great in terms of income if they pay for it, which I hope they do. But so how do we resolve this? Because if you want to import white maize from America, I read you have to give them notice and say, please, will you grow us some white maize so that in a year we can import it? and Mexico being the only other significant producer of white maize, is its excess, if it has any, is in huge demand, which pushes up prices, which pushes up inflation, which is not good.
Yeah, you see, John, the issue here is, and I think just to bring ease to South Africans, the first point is that we are not, as a country, running out of white maize. We have sufficient supply, so
Okay.
we are fine on that. That's the fundamental point. The countries that really need a lot of maize, Zimbabwe, for example, they've had to import this year. They need about 1 million tons. They've imported significant amount, but they are not closer to meeting that demand. Zambia needs 500,000 tons. Mozambique 500,000 tons. Malawi is the same numbers. So that's where the demand is actually bigger. And of course, then considering that they are closer to us, and we are the country that usually has the surplus, we've seen that outside demand pushing up the South African prices to levels that we are seeing now. But we don't think that necessarily as a country we will run out of white maize or anything. And yes, indeed, there may be some imports that may come from the U.S., but I think that may be rerouted to those countries next to us. In terms of the white or maize products, if then the prices remain at the levels that we are seeing now, just over 6,000 rand per ton for a sustained period, it does mean that in the next few months we may see that grain-related food products remain at a slightly elevated period. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel, John, because we are starting now a new season. And by all indications, the farmers suggest that they will plant more area, and we are beginning to see some good rains in some regions in the northern parts of the country. And I think that then this is all to say the problem we are having now of tighter supplies is short term, but really no shortages in South Africa as best as we can tell at the moment.
That is indeed light at the end of the tunnel. Wandile Sihlobo, agricultural economist, thank you very much for talking to us.